folks, welcome back to my crazy little work shed. So today we're going to be making some antler plugs. These are 7/16. I got an order in, so I thought this would be a perfect time to make a video so that you can learn how to make your own antler plugs. Now of course I'm going to use a lathe today for this, but it is possible to use a Dremel or a rotary tool of some kind. The benefits to using a lathe is that you can get the tunnels close to perfect as far as round, but I have made them freehand with a Dremel before and it's not really that difficult. So yeah, let's proceed. Let's start out by making sure that we find the right size antler. So I have some calipers here, and these calipers measure in millimeters or inches, but I make all of my plugs converted over to millimeters. It's just easier to measure it that way. 7/16 plugs. Oh my gosh, there's a gigantic spider in here. Hold on, you guys gotta see this. Look at that spider. Holy cow. I didn't even see him in here. Look guys, I love spiders and all kinds of wildlife, but that kind of creeps me out. I know there's spiders in here. I like looking at them. I just don't want them on me. You know, that's crazy. I'm gonna leave him alone, but I might shoo him out later or something. I don't want to hurt him. It's hot in here. 7/16 translates to about 11.1 millimeters. And the general rule that I like to stick by when making gauges is you want to go at least 5 to 8 millimeters bigger with your raw material, because you're going to carve down a lot of it trying to get it balanced, you know, like sure or whatever they call it. I'm not a professional, guys, but you know, in order to make it smooth on the lathe. So this antler here is about 19.2 millimeters, and it's got a pretty good straight portion from about here to here, which would actually be perfect for our needs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to the bandsaw, I'm going to cut it down, and I'm going to use the belt sander to take off some of the bumps, and I'll show you all that. Yeah, we won't pay attention to the fact that I probably need a new saw blade. This one's pretty dull. Okay, so basically the first piece of antler that I ended up cutting, I forgot to push the record button, of course. So I went ahead and cut another piece for you just as an example of how I would cut it on the bandsaw. So we'll put that other one aside. Now the first one I cut that I didn't record, notice, you have to pay real close attention to the center of these. Now some of them are going to be real soft, really soft. And you don't want that. Not when you're making plugs. When you're making tunnels, that's fine because you're going to drill out the center anyway. But when you're making plugs, you want it to, you know, it's still going to have, like, you know, just a little bit of, if I can get it to focus. It's still going to have a little bit of, like, texture there, but, you can tell when you cut open or when you cut an antler whether or not it's going to be mushy or going to be hard. In this case, this one's got a really nice firm, not soft at all center. So this is going to be perfect for our needs. Now what I need to do is I'm going to save myself a little bit of trouble on the lathe, and I'm going to take out this slight curve right here and right here using my disc sander. This is normally a pretty easy process, especially when you have a disc sander that has a tray. It's a lot easier because you can kind of lay down the material and roll it slowly. It'll naturally round itself out that way. Now that I have this all smoothed out with the belt sander and the ends straightened, I can go ahead and load it into the lathe, and we'll get started on that. Now, the general rule that you need to remember when you're using a lathe, first of all, it depends on the jaws you have. I happen to have a Nova chuck with pen jaws, like you can order them separately. And so I don't really need a whole lot of something to hang on to. So the general thing I think of is maybe about anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 inch you need to be able to, you know, keep for holding on with the lathe. The rest of what you're using can be used for your gauges. So the width of the gauges really just depends on the artist. I just use whatever fits in my ear. I made this gauge for myself a really long time ago. It has an abalone inlay in it, but it's really old. I was really new to making gauges at the time, so I didn't really do the greatest flare. But as far as width-wise, this is the perfect width. So it's a good template for all of the rest of the gauges that I make. So it would be good for you to make your own template. You can do it, you know, you can make yourself gauges and just go off with those. Or you can make yourself a template with a spare piece of antler, bone, or wood. I use this to measure, and when I get it put on the lathe, you'll see how. So it works out really well. Quick lathe tip. Always make sure to turn your lathe manually when you set your tool rest, just to make sure it's not going to snag when you turn your lathe on. The tool I'm using right now is a spindle gouge. Always make sure to sharpen your tools before you start a project. It'll prevent any catching, and it'll save your tools, save your lathe, and save the material you're working on. Right here I'm using a parting tool. It's really handy for shoring up the end of your material. Here you can see me switching back and forth between the parting tool and a skew chisel. The parting tool can also be handy for cutting close to the jaws or cutting down to a certain diameter, whereas the skew chisel is better for smoothing and finishing and trying to make sure that your blank is an even diameter all the way down. It never hurts to get your calipers and check your diameter periodically. You know, if you cut too much off, you can't put it back on, so it's always better to be safe than sorry. So if 7/16 converts over to 11.1 millimeters, which is our wearable center, we want our outer flares of the plugs to be 12.1 millimeters. However, you have to take into account when you start to sand the plugs, it's going to take off a little bit more of the diameter. Not much, but we do need to account for it. This is why I'm going to make the overall diameter of this blank 12.2 to 12.3 millimeters. I'll be completely honest, when I first started turning on a lathe, I was scared of the skew chisel. You know, it has a tendency to catch if you don't hold it at the right angle, so definitely make sure and practice with this tool before you cut anything important. It does have a learning curve, but once you do figure out how to use it, it's really handy. Here I'm using a pencil and my template to mark the places on the blank that are going to become our plugs. I tell you what, sometimes getting my camera to focus is a pain. The first thing I do when I start to make these plugs after I've prepped the blank is I take the parting tool and I separate the plugs from the rest of the material by taking away some of the diameter in between. Using my spindle gouge, I start to carve down to the wearable center and form the curve and the flares. If you take your time during this process and check your measurements regularly, you'll end up with a really nice finished product. make sure to check your measurements for the wearable center and the outer flares. When you're satisfied with the width and the diameter of your plugs, it's time to sand. The sandpaper that I use I get from auto parts stores because they tend to have the finer grain sandpapers. I sand from about 320 all the way up to 2500. If you cut it into little strips, it's also easier to store and you can get into the hard to reach places. Wet sanding is also key when you're working with any kind of bone or horn. This sanding does tend to be a really long process. I mentioned before in my bone carving video that the polishing compound I'm using right here is left over from when I used to do nails as a nail tech. It's an acrylic nail polishing compound. You have to be licensed in order to get this specific brand. However, I think there is a similar one that's available at Sally's Beauty Supply. Anybody can go in and buy that. Otherwise, perhaps a plastics polishing compound would work. But I'm not super sure, so you really are probably going to have to do your own experimenting with that. Here you can see I used my parting tool to cut off a lot of the excess diameter in between the two finished plugs, and then I used my jeweler's saw to cut off the end plug. You don't have to use a jeweler's saw, you can use your parting tool throughout. I just find that it gives a cleaner cut and it's less that I have to sand off. I like to save some time by sanding the end of the second plug before I cut it off of the lathe. It just saves the amount of time that you have to spend on hand sanding. While we're waiting an eternity for this sanding to be completed even with a higher video speed, I just want to let everybody know that I am receiving all of your requests for video tutorials, and I will make those at some point when I have time. So, thank you all for your requests. I really enjoy reading your comments and look forward to making more videos for you in the future. Just like with the first plug, I used the parting tool to cut down extra material and the jeweler's saw to remove the plug completely. Now that both of the plugs have been removed from the lathe, I can take them over to the workbench and use a barrel sander on my Dremel to smooth down the one remaining rough edge on each plug. Now that those two remaining rough edges on those plugs have been sanded down with the barrel sander, I can finish them off using my sandpaper just like I did for the rest of the plug. I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of sanding. I've sped up this video super fast. In fact, it's so fast it looks like I'm not doing anything. But trust me, this is one of the longer parts of this process. If you take special time and care in sanding these, you're going to come out with a beautiful shiny plug. It's worth it in the end. When all the sanding is completed, it never hurts to hit it one more time with that polishing compound. Alright folks, so this concludes our Antler plugs. So here they are. Let's see. See if I can get them to focus. You can't really tell. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put a still right here. And if you guys have any questions, comments, anything, just let me know. Yes, I know, I need to clean the rust off my lathe. I know, Guys, I live in Florida. I work in a shed. It's really humid here. Trust me, I'm constantly cleaning the rust off my tools. So, yeah. Anyway, something I'm behind on. It needs to get done. So, anyway, y'all have a fine, fabulous day.